So what are BrainBites? BrainBites are essentially virtual-led instructor videos. They go for around 35 minutes, and they are designed particularly with the brain in mind. So how do we keep people engaged for a period of time that meets the brain's need for novelty, the brain's need for reward? So each topic introduces people to a little bit of the science. So, you know, what's the science of, for example, distraction? And then we talk about, well, what are the implications of what we're learning about the brain and distraction, and what are some really simple tips and tools and strategies that people can apply straight after watching these virtual-led instructor videos that they can apply in their workplace. So they're actually getting value from that particular piece of information and a tool that they can start practicing that helps them to build habits. So we know people can only take in small amounts of information at any one time. This is why the old way of doing training, of bringing people into a venue and making it, I can remember my early days, I used to run 8-day programs, residential programs. You can imagine how completely brain dead people felt at the end of that time. It's almost a bit like that sheep dip approach where you dip them in and get them exposed to a whole pile of information, but the question is how much of that do they retain, and then how much do they go on to then build as a new habit? Because we know, for example, that the brain needs to be exposed to a concept at least 3 times before we have any chance of forming the wiring to connect with that material or begin to develop that skill. And in fact, we know a new habit can take anywhere from between 23 and 282 days to develop, which is a really long time, isn't it? So this is why you kind of go, well, we sent people off to do that training, and then you bring them back into the workplace and they don't remember half of what they've been exposed to. So this is we've developed the first series. We have a plan to develop 4 within the next year, and we're also collaborating with partners around particular areas that we don't have expertise in, but we think would add value in putting a neuroscience lens over it, if you like. And I guess one of the things that probably was also top of mind for us in developing these is that we're still seeing in workplaces a really big disconnect between what science is showing and what people are doing. And we think that it's time to address that disconnect. So I'm just going to take you through kind of what is in this first series of BrainBites, so you get a bit of a flavour and a taste of what we cover in those different BrainBites. So the first BrainBite is what we call kind of a foundation module. It's really about exposing people to this concept I spoke about earlier, that the key organising principle of the brain is to minimise threat, maximise reward. And so it introduces some really basic concepts about how the brain functions and how this whole concept of going limbic. So we know when our limbic brain or our old reptilian brain fires up, that this impacts really significantly on our prefrontal cortex or our executive brain. It's the part of the brain that helps you to plan, it's part of the brain that helps you to decide, to prioritise, to recall information, and to inhibit your responses so you don't engage in those career-limiting kind of behaviours or actions. So it's a really important part of the brain, but we know that the limbic brain and the prefrontal cortex are kind of very related to one another. As your limbic brain fires up, your capacity to think clearly dampens or diminishes, if you like. You know, back to that example of the shark, you know, you didn't want to have to do a risk assessment, you wanted to act very quickly. So in this foundation module, we talk about the whole idea of going limbic or flipping your lid. And we talk about some simple ways that you can begin to develop those skills to self-manage, and I guess it links back to the whole concept too of emotional intelligence. How do you self-regulate and notice when you're going limbic, and what can you do in that moment? And the simple tool we expose people to this in this one is the whole concept of just labeling and noticing when you're going limbic. That's the absolute first step, is that people have got to see and feel where that happens in their body and be able to name it. And just by doing that, you actually dampen down your limbic arousal. So we share those kind of ideas in this first foundation one, and we always recommend that people have a look at this one. It's actually free, so if you wanted to jump on afterwards and just go onto our website and have a look at BrainBites, and you can have a look at the foundation module. We've tried to do it in a way that is visually interesting. It's not text heavy. It has, you know, lovely imagery, and we include videos and YouTube clips. So the second one is, come on, play nicely. The second one is, we've called it the 5 drivers of behaviour that scare your brain. Now, what was one of the really interesting things that has emerged from the field of social cognitive neuroscience is that the brain is a social organ. So we care deeply about what are described as social threats in our environment. So we know, and this was a surprising result, that the same parts of the brain light up with physical pain or physical threats as social threats. So a threat to our life, you know, through kind of, you can imagine when that guy saw the shark, you know, the parts of his brain, he would have been thinking, I'm going to die here. And yet we know that the same part of the brain activates when we experience a threat to our status or our sense of significance in the world. So we introduced this whole concept that the brain is a social organ. And we talk about 5 different key drivers of behaviour that are related to the social brain in the social world of work. And the 5, it kind of builds and is linked to the SCARF model that David Rock developed, if people are familiar with that. So the first one is significance. We care about the extent to which we're seen as making a significant contribution in a group, and if we feel like our the contribution we're making has been challenged, or we feel like we're seen as lesser than another person in a group, then we experience a threat in that domain. And again, that's not a good thing in the workplace. Experience a threat, your performance goes down, you know, because your limbic system fires up, because your brain is saying there's something here that's potentially a threat to your life. And we care about certainty. So that's the second one in this scare model. So the brain is a prediction organ, and moment by moment we're trying to predict what's going to happen next. About 42% of our 50 to 70,000 thoughts we have every day are trying to predict the future. And the bad news is we usually get it wrong. So we care about certainty, and that's a massive one when you think about the current work environment where there's significant amounts of change. So people are often feeling quite limbic in that certainty domain. Autonomy, we care about autonomy, which is why micromanaging doesn't work. People want to feel like they have a sense of choice and a sense of control of their own destiny, how they perform their work tasks, and you know, have a choice and a say in matters that affect them. So when people feel like that's not the case, then they will experience quite a significant threat in that particular domain. Relatedness is the next one. We know that you know, going back to when we lived in caves and clans, every new person we meet is foe before friend, and that was because someone could come onto your land and potentially pose a danger to you. So the brain always treated new people suspiciously, and we still do that because we still are living with this old limbic brain that hasn't evolved since we lived in caves and clans. So people want to feel connected, they want to feel part of a group, they want to feel part of an in-group, and that's why when people don't feel that, they experience intense threat in that domain, and it's why we, hence the kind of terminology, they died of a broken heart, because it's felt as real. We've seen the children in Romanian orphanages who died from that lack of attachment and social connection. And the last one is equity. So we really want to feel like we're getting a fair deal, that we're treated equitably and with our other colleagues in the workplace, that someone else isn't getting the best work and we're getting the really, you know, icky work to do. So we care about things being fair and just and reasonable. When we experience threat in any of these domains, it can significantly impact on our performance and indeed our stress levels. So we introduce this concept, and then we actually take people through doing your very own profile, because it's important for us to understand in the world of work that we operate in, what are our top drivers that drive our behaviour in that 5. Now, we all have needs in each of those domains, but we will have a preference between the ones that we know we experience the most threat or the most reward in. And so, you know, for example, even just thinking about the intensity of threat that's generated if we, and I'm sure lots of you still struggle with the whole performance appraisal process, but if we just say to someone, I just want you to step in my office, maybe at 3 o'clock, you know, I know it's only 10 o'clock in the morning, I want to give you some feedback. When we just say that to another person, that person's brain goes into threat, and in fact the threat is as significant as walking down a dark alley and hearing footsteps behind us. And so we know that there's got to be different ways that we do things, because what happens between 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock for that person? Perhaps they're going on sick, looking for another job. They're trying to meet the brain's need for certainty, trying to predict what on earth it could be that this person's wanting to give them feedback about. So we know that's not great. So we talk about that, and then we talk about, well, what are the ways that you can apply this model in different contexts? And I think in this particular BrainBite we talk about using it for change, managing a change process, but you can use it for training, you know, planning a training session. You can use it in multiple different ways. So it's a really useful model that people have used lots and lots. What I want to show you now is just an example of one of the clips that we use in our next BrainBite, which is looking at you know, how to manage emotions in the workplace, just to give you kind of a taste of some of the things that we do to make, you know, mix it up a bit and make it a bit interesting. And I know your brains are needing some novelty right now. Some of you may have seen this before. It's a video we use to demonstrate the concept that emotions are contagious, and I'd love you to raise your hand if you notice yourself being infected by the emotions in this clip. Oops, hang on. Not trying to sell you Coca-Cola there. Hands up, did anyone have a bit of a chuckle and a laugh when you saw that? I know I can't watch it without laughing every single time that I see it. So that's the kind of thing that we share with people. So the next BrainBite looks at, you know, how to manage emotions in the workplace. We talk about the typical self-regulation strategies that people use and why they're not particularly effective. And we introduce people to this, a couple of frameworks and ideas, or what we would even call kind of cognitive shortcuts to support them to self-regulate better in the workplace. We know that emotion contagion in the workplace, you saw an example in that clip of positive emotion contagion, but we know when we have negative emotion contagion, it can go out 3 generations in a workplace, and that's quite significant because the impacts are on other people's performance then doesn't just reside in that team, it's infected into outside of that. And we know that, for example, for those of you that work with leaders or are in a leadership position, we influence the engagement climate of our people by about 70%. So if we come in a bad mood, then we infect other people's with that emotional wake, if you like. And so we've got to learn, you know, how do we actually self-regulate so that we notice how we're feeling and we actually regulate and do something about it rather than sucking it up, because we know when we suppress our emotions, other brains are very clever. Remember, they're trying to keep you safe. Though your brain has sensed a threat in another person that you're interacting with, and so our brain goes on high alert, and we have a parasympathetic reaction to their going limbic. So we go limbic to a degree as well. Our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, and we start to, our brain starts to get us ready in case there's something that's bothering them that we should pay attention to. The next one, BrainBite is looking at the whole idea of frazzle and stress. I love the term frazzle. I think it's a really apt one for what's kind of happening in the world of work right now. And we know that one of the biggest issues in the workplace is the rising tide of stress, and we know that there's increasing workers' compensation claims. And we also know that there has been a lot of attention on OH, occupational health and safety stuff, and a lot of it's been quite physical safety orientated. But I think that what employers need to be aware of into the future is that they could be leaving themselves open to potential litigation down the track if we're not actually creating an environment that keeps people safe and also tries to deal with and support people to not feel stressed. In this, what I really love in this particular BrainBite is we draw on very contemporary research that's looking at, we've been approaching stress management in completely the wrong way. Stress is not something to be managed. Stress is something that we actually need to develop a mindset about. We need to see stress as not necessarily bad for us. It can actually be good. It can help us to perform. For those of you that haven't seen Kelly McGonigal's TED Talk,